over the course of 8 years, they said, Russia has secretly, through a variety of shell companies and proxies, spent a little more than $300 million to influence politicians and other officials, not just in the U.S., which can be the U.S. can be kind of narcissistic and self-obsessed, not just in the U.S., but in more than a baker's dozen of countries. History is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. We have talked about the ways in which the powers that be seek to manipulate things behind the scenes. And, we're very conscious of the idea that the U.S. is a number one, top 5 agent of chaos in the world. You have certainly also heard our accusations and explorations of the ways in which Russia manipulates politics behind the scenes. And often we were very, I would say, or at least for my part, I was stating this as fact, even when the U.S. government did not officially acknowledge the activities of Russia. There's a strong argument to be made that doing so might have put them in a, throwing stones, glass house situation. But before we get to this last story for this weekly Strange News segment, Matt, Noel, true, false, Russia manipulates other countries. What do you think?
True.
Nah, you gotta show me the proof, man.
All right.
Show me the dark money.
Yes.
Huh? Okay.
Fans of biblical lore will perhaps consider you a descendant of Thomas the Doubter there. So let us stick our
That's my middle name,
fingers in these wounds, The U.S. State Department came out not too long ago and said something that surprised me. And we'll quiz each other later on which aspect of this is surprising. They said that since 2014, so about 8 years, over the course of 8 years, they said Russia has secretly, through a variety of shell companies and proxies, spent a little more than $300 million to influence politicians and other officials, not just in the U.S., which can be the U.S. can be kind of narcissistic and self-obsessed, not just in the U.S., but in more than a baker's dozen of countries, actually 24 countries. And this statement came out officially from the Department of State. What they did was pretty clever. It comes, it's a practice that you might find in the Confucius institutes that are PRC, Chinese-backed things in the U.S. It's also something that you see the U.S. doing in Latin America. This money was supporting think tanks, which are wildly unregulated. So $300 million, Uncle Sam says that's a minimum. But what surprises you about that statement, if anything? Does anything surprise you guys?
That it's that little amount of money.
Ding, ding, ding. Me too, man. Me too. And until we had done some digging into political corruption and things like lobbying in a chapter of our upcoming book, Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. Don't black bag us. We did plug it, corporate overlords. Until we had done that, I always imagined incorrectly that it took a great deal of financial grease to move the levers of power. 300 million doesn't seem like a lot if we're talking about, 24 different countries. But this has been conclusively confirmed. The U.S. intelligence community now is saying $300 minimum. They don't have the flashlights to find all the dark corners of the money here. And right now, this is so sensitive that there aren't a ton of people going on record. In previous episodes, we had shouted out specific former individuals. We had shouted out things that are all but official leaks from the US government. Quick tip. If you're ever wondering whether the US has authorized a leak that they don't want to be responsible for, then you will hear it reported as a source close to the Pentagon in the New York Times and stuff like that. And it's 100% everybody in the government saying, yeah, no, it's fine to tell them, just like make sure you don't get car bombed.
I also like the one that's like someone familiar with with the situation. That's also good.
Yeah, that's a classic too, and you can't argue with the golden oldies. I want to draw special attention for anybody who wants to read this to a New York Times article by a guy named Edward Wong. Russia secretly gave 300 million to political parties and officials worldwide. So these streams of money are very hard to trace, but they're very powerful. And when we think of 300 million, which is absolutely a life-changing amount of money to the vast majority of the population, when we think of that in terms of moving the world to better align with your vision, it does seem like a bargain. But we have to consider that that money moves in creative ways, and you would be surprised by how low a price people will sell themselves for if they don't see the bigger picture. A lot of the folks who are getting bought or influenced have no idea what the overall budget is, right? Like if you pay somebody $20 to do something, you don't want them to know that you have another $500 if you really need them to do it. This is stuff like, for instance, this is happening in Ecuador. It has happened in Ecuador. It's happened in a couple of African countries in very sensitive regions. It's, of course, happening in Eastern Europe, right? Shout out Belarus. But when you see the way it works, it's important to realize that a lot of this isn't getting reported. The U.S. has been doing many similar things, as has China, the other superpower. But just to walk it through, it's washing money, false contracts, shell companies, little bit of lobbying, have the ambassador give a gift to another ambassador, right? Or have them donate to a presidential campaign. And I hope that's not too close for a lot of us listening in the United States. Russia has relied on state-owned enterprises and large firms that are ostensibly quasi-governmental or ostensibly private to move across Central America, the Middle East, and of course, Europe. And when you have a think tank, you can be in the catbird seat. You can be someone who whispers power and powerful thoughts to the throne. I'm fascinated.
Is that like when a cat goes?
Yeah, they're chirping.
Is that the catbird seat?
Yes, yeah. The catbird seat is maybe an anachronistic phrase, but if you understand that phrase, just write in or find us on social media. The issue here really is, as dumb as it might sound, I was trying to think of a current analogy. They're paying influencers the same way that companies go to Instagram and try to touch people, right? And their influence is not, let me convince someone to buy, this tummy flattener or this wrinkle eraser. It's let me convince someone to do what I, as Russia, want regarding fossil fuels, regarding democratic rights, regarding whether or not to sign a treaty. It gets pretty nasty pretty quick. And the U.S. government is now warning actively, not surreptitiously, which they've been doing for years, but they are actively warning the countries that they feel are under target for this campaign to expel Russian intelligence officers. But that's kind of an easier said than done sort of thing. Like finding the money, tracing the money is already really difficult. Finding the actual asset is also incredibly, I mean, it could be really difficult. You know what I mean? A lot of Russian intelligence doesn't outsource the way U.S. intelligence might. The CIA just got smacked for that, by the way. And they said, hey, maybe we should do a better job vetting the folks we essentially contract in all these countries.
Yeah, you could do that. That's probably a good idea.
But
Ben, this is elections as well as disinfo and the combination of the two, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Shadow of Alexander Dugin.
Okay.
You've nailed it, Matt. The idea is that Russia's intelligence apparatus and its government, which is essentially Vladimir Putin and his entourage, are using some sideline methods to make changes that are not immediately apparent until there's a full aggregate effect. So all of a sudden, maybe Latin America, the hegemonic backyard of the U.S., starts voting for better bilateral relationships with Moscow. I know this can sound a little bit boring, but I promise it is not boring when the wars go hot. And the Biden administration is apparently in a little bit of dissent right now. I mean, the U.S. politically is in domestic dissent because they're attempting to declassify more intelligence about the activities of Russia. And this is something to pay attention to. It's just for us and stuff they don't want you to know, it's a bit of a validation. And for a lot of our fellow listeners as well, because you have to ask yourself, a lot of historians are going to earn their PhDs in the future asking this question. Who knew what when, right? The same questions about 9/11 are going to be the same questions people ask about the current war in Ukraine, right? What did people know and not share? What indications existed? And were the regimes of secrecy that were instituted, were they helpful or were they ultimately harmful? So we anticipate more information about this is going to come out now. And yes, the world is unfair. I, for instance, can't get away with a late fee at the library, and people are out here moving the world for the low, low price of $300 million.